Okay, welcome back, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for bearing with us. We have a shortened session, so it's going to be like a fast forward short session. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to introduce.
The microphone.
Is it working? Okay. I'm not going to introduce the people around me because they need no introduction. But we are gathered here to celebrate the release of two crucial new texts that we're adding to this growing canon of critical Romani studies. So we have the book called Romani Liberation by Jan Selling. And we also are celebrating Magda Matache's book, Time for Reparations, A Global Perspective. And to my right is Nicoleta Bitsu, who wrote the foreword for Jan's book, and she will offer some comments as well. And I'm not sure if there's, so Soraya Post, she wrote the afterword, and she's here with us too, as well as Hans Kalerash, who is also here with us. So looking forward to your engagement. we love you too.
Oh, sorry. I love you too.
I think we've all had a little too much champagne already. It's been a long day, so just pull through this last session. Okay, so I'm going to start with some opening remarks of my own, and then I'm going to turn the table over to Nico, and then, then to the authors, and then to Nico, and then if there's time for questions, hopefully we'll have time for that too. So starting with Jan's book. Jan's book is a comprehensive, broad, and yet cohesive and highly readable overview of important moments in Romani history, as well as noteworthy debates regarding Romani historiography, memory, and identity. Jan gives us a detailed account of Romani civil rights and organizing across Europe, which is significant as this narrative that he weaves fills a significant void in existing scholarship. More than that, what is fantastic in the story that Jan weaves is that he manages to center Romani agency and self-determination as he covers the expansive territory of Romani enslavement, genocide, and the history of the Romani political mobilization and Romani intersectional movements in less than 200 pages. Importantly, Jan not only gives us a counter history of the plight of the Roma and the ethnopolitical activism of the Romani struggle for liberation, he also importantly puts this narrative back into history, drawing connections between other minoritized struggles, but also with contemporaneous political processes relevant to whatever period that Jan discusses at whatever moment in the book. And in so doing, this book achieves an emplacement of Romani history within the global landscape of capital H history. The second book we celebrate today, Time for Reparations, dovetails nicely with Jan's book in many ways. As the full title indicates, Time for Reparations, A Global Perspective, the book also emplaces Romani struggles within global histories of injustice and reparations. This book traverses many different manifestations of injustice, from Jamaican slavery and colonization to unhealed wounds of Kurds, Palestinians, and Armenian communities, among many others, in a truly comprehensive and global perspective. The book highlights the urgency of adopting an agenda of reparations through active acknowledgement of past and continuing injustice. In the book's introduction, Jacqueline Bhabha, one of Magda's co-editors, characterizes what it means for communities to be living in what Black feminist theorist Christina Sharp has called the wake of the disaster of trauma. Jacqueline writes, as, quote, lives continue to be lived under the shadows of past injustice, time does not stand still. For the legacy of unremediated past injustice endures, the wounds remain unhealed on the bodies and in the minds and the souls of survivors, their descendants, their communities, and their polities, end quote. So both Jan and Magda's books explore living in this wake of trauma and what societies must do in order to redress that trauma through remediation, healing, emancipation, and liberation, connecting historic injustice to the legacy of harm and suffering in the present, which is a theme in this panel, and we'll talk a lot more about throughout the course of this conversation. So having kind of summarized broadly these books, I want to turn now to the authors themselves to each speak briefly about their own books. So I don't know if you have a preference of
Okay, you can turn on the PowerPoint. Do I switch the pictures? Firstly, you all know that I'm not a Roma, and I have done reflections about this in the book and during my work for many years. The teachers in this have primarily been Hans Calderas, Soraya Post, and Nicoletta Bitu. And then I learned many other, I got to know many other teachers as well. So my purpose was, I have been studying anti-Gypsyism as a phenomenon and a theory on that for more than 15 years. I have also studied Gypsylorism for many years, and that all made me fed up. So I wanted to not just be on the dark side. I wanted to write an accessible book which gives hope. So to get away from the Gypsylorist tradition of portraying Roma history as or Roma as an anonymous collective of eternal losers, or as more critical maybe research than later has made Roma into eternal victims. So I wanted to get away from that and to provide a narrative of Romani liberation where Roma themselves, Sinti and Roma and all groups, are the subjects, the drivers of history. And where the starting point is that Romani people have the same aspirations for freedom and the same desire to fulfill their dreams as everybody else. That's a counter narrative in that sense. And I started this work, and the main research has been done together with Romani scholars and non-Romani critical scholars within the Rom archive, which was headed by Nicoletta Bitu and Romani Rosa. And that was my school. Okay, and maybe do I switch here myself? What, like this?
Yes.
So, okay, just very short, no, not the text, but just images. I want to personalize Romani individuals who have been actors and heroes in Romani liberation, different contexts. We saw Alfreda Markowska, we saw Alexander Baurov. Here we see Katarina Taikon holding the torch together in the celebration with Martin Luther King, which connects those two fights. That's an impressive picture, I think. And here the next section about historical justice, as I call it, that links very much to Magda Matache's contribution. It's about memorialization also in the politics of memorialization. Here we see the Auschwitz crematorium, and to the right we see a Norwegian one which commemorates the victims of forced sterilizations in Norway. And of course, it's not comparable, the Holocaust and forced sterilizations, but in the collective memory and for the discourses, the political discourses, it is as strong and as important in the Scandinavian and Nordic contexts. So that's that part. And this is a picture which everybody loves to hate because nobody understands it. But this is what I have tried to do, to develop a theory of critical historiography of Romani studies, where it has developed from Gypsylorism, from the beginning of the Enlightenment until where we are today. It was only that at the beginning. Now it's still there, but we have other narratives as well. We had new Romani studies, as they call it, and then we have critical Romani studies where we are today, and then we have subaltern voices, Roma authors like Hans Calderas, we have Roma academics like Ian Hancock was one of them, Katarina Taikon, of course, so that this is changing over time. And it's not a one-way road, it's not a complete, but this is a way of understanding this subalternity at one end and Gypsylorism as at the other end. So have tried to be as quick as possible. I love this image. This is the sister of Katarina Taikon, Rosa Taikon, and she is raising the finger, and she has the voice here to tell the Prime Minister of Sweden what he is not doing and what he should do about this. So that was this. And maybe, so my two theoretical contributions here is the one, how to achieve political change in the Roma cause, or how I have understood it, listening and reading Romani voices. There are two things. The one is like Chang and Chang write about the interest convergence. The classical example, of course, is that the Social Democrats, they did something for the working class so that they don't become communists. That was an example of interest convergence. And EU entry demands, as we heard, that was also interest convergence. And the other factor or a theoretical explanation, as I see, that's a quote from a social democratic prime minister of the 50s, Tage Erlander. He was talking about the discontent of rising expectations, meaning that when things improve, people want things to be even better. People don't make revolution because conditions are bad, because they see that something else is possible. It is this frustration with a reality that does not meet the expectation that can make social tensions boil over. We see, I think, and that gives me hope in the Swedish case, we see so impressive, young and old Romani voices from Sweden. They have this because they have seen, and somebody's cheating with the Roma community in Sweden now, and they see it, you see it, and this is a driver for change, I think. But neither of this is an automatic process, and this is the last thing I would say. Information and awareness rising is of absolute importance to stimulate interest convergence or radicalization of social movements out of the frustrated expectations. Somebody has to tell about this in a comprehensive way, like all of you have done today. So this is one reason why education, and more specifically higher education, is so crucial for political change in the long run. Thank you.
Elegantly so.
Thank you very much. I assume that was a
And apropos that the bus is leaving.
yes, I see it. I got it. But first of all, Jan, congratulations for publishing this book. I find it particularly important, especially in the context of the recent history of the Roma movement, of the Roma scholarship. And here, perhaps Nico and I have this common interest of wanting to see the recent Roma history being analyzed, being put on a paper and so on. So whenever I meet with Andrei Mirga and others, I just beg them, and I do the same with you, please write, and please, give us something that we can learn from and keep it, for the next generation. So thank you for that. And I think the book is also very interesting from the perspective of solidarity movements, and that picture with Martin Luther King and Katarina Taikon is just absolutely priceless. So thank you so much for giving us that. Now, about our volume, Time for Reparations, I co-edited this volume together with two Harvard professors and colleagues. One is Kerry Elkins, a historian whose research was absolutely instrumental in the reparations claims that were made to the British in the context of the Mau uprising in the 1950s. And the second co-editor is Jacqueline Bhabha, who is a lawyer, but also a co-founder of the Roma program at Harvard. I would say that the seeds of this volume go way back. I was doing advocacy for reparations way before I knew the concept. Basically, if you were to look at our work at Romani Kriznico in the 2000s, we would protest, we would write letters to the Orthodox Church, asking them on one hand to recognize their involvement in slavery, but also to apologize for the enslavement of the Roma. But I think it was mostly during my PhD work, but also my postdoctoral research at Harvard. When doing research, I felt more and more the need to actually look at reparations as a possible path for a more just society, but also a moral obligation that we all have towards Roma and many other oppressed groups. So Jackie, Bhabha, and I started to write some op-eds about reparations. And we also organized one of our annual Roma conferences at Harvard, looking specifically at reparations, but not only for Roma-related injustices, but reparations at the global level. And we took the same path in this volume, which is not only about Roma, but we kind of placed Roma in the global conversations on reparations. And I hope we have time to talk about these, frustration that I had while I was at Harvard and nobody knew about the Roma slavery, about the Holocaust, and the Roma victims, and so on. So the volume includes 17 case studies, most of them written by authors who are members of the communities that they write about. So we are very, very proud of that, aside from the content, which I think is also important. And of course, the fact that we have Ian Hancock and Mireille Fanon, who is the daughter of Frantz Fanon, and Sir Hilary Beckless, Taya Miles as contributors in this volume, makes it even more meaningful. And there are so many funny stories about Ian Hancock's, drafting process, but I won't get into that now, maybe after we drink a little bit more. But the volume really starts by recognizing that reparations have been discussed at the global level in the past few decades. And we acknowledge that, for instance, the Durban conference in 2001, I think that some of you went there, was a milestone in the global conversations on reparations. And it made it very clear in the Durban Declaration that enslavement and colonialism were some of the main sources of structural inequities, but also present-day racism in different forms across the world. But I think that in practice, what we see is that the reparations programs are really scarce or even inexistent. If we were to think about slavery, for instance, in any context, not only the Roma context, but in any context, there is so little about that. And it is clear, and Nico alluded to that earlier this morning, that state institutions and any other liable private and public stakeholders involved in these unjust processes, they don't want to be accountable for what they've done. So one question that many of the authors in the book address is really, how do we push governments? How do we push institutions? How do we push banks and companies to actually recognize the harm and repair it in a form or another? Is that a sign for me?
No.
So, the volume compiles these case studies, but it's not just a list of problems. I think that the end goal of it, at least in the way that I saw it in my mind, but also in my soul, was definitely to create a solidarity movement towards reparations. So even thinking about the advocacy in Jamaica or in the US on reparations for slavery, I just felt like we are not there. So how do we place ourselves in that conversation? And I think it works in many ways. Like, for instance, this year is for the first time when Department of History at Harvard is actually bringing a postdoc to work on the history of American Roma, which I think is huge. And some of the people who were contributing to this volume were the ones who decided on this postdoctoral fellowship. So I think another premise that we start from is to recognize that the post-Holocaust reparations can be seen as a model and have been used as a model for reparations in different contexts. But the caveat there, of course, is that the Roma, LGBT, people with disabilities are not really recognized and have not really been recognized in these reparations programs the way that they should have been. So from that perspective, Kako Yanko, or Professor Ian Hancock, writes this beautiful and long chapter on the Holocaust and the post-Holocaust reparations, but basically bringing the history of the Roma advocacy for reparations in that context. And this is absolutely spectacular. The level of knowledge, but also the level of engagement that Kako had in this whole process. And then the other Roma chapter, and I will finish here, that we have in the book is a chapter that I co-authored with Jacqueline Bhabha. And it takes a little bit of a different perspective. So we look at slavery in Romania, but we also look at recent collective injustices against Roma and create propose some methods of reparations, not only from a historical perspective, but really looking at the idea of collective injustices. So our focus is much more on the collective than the moment when the injustice happened. And we propose, I think, 8 methods of reparations, but when you create categories as a scholar, you all know that you always miss something. So, and just accept that and still create some categories. So what we said is that truth-telling, memorializing resistance, strengthening the voices of the victims, offender accountability, restitution, apology, financial compensations, and legal and policy reforms would be some of the methods that we see as relevant, and particularly in relation to recent or present day collective injustices, we focus on this idea of offender accountability, because it really breaks my heart to see that we have in the Czech Republic some compensation programs, but then when are we going to talk, or when the women in the Czech Republic are going to talk to the nurses and the medical doctors who actually perform sterilization? So I think there is a need for this moment of truth, and there is a need for accountability. So with that, I'll stop here, and I hope
no, that was great. Thanks. Thank you, Magda. I want to invite now Nico Letabitu to offer some thoughts on both texts.
I will try to be as good as my. I think, in a way, the two books are complementary, but amazing in the sense of discovering. For example, I had a reflection today, a new way of power for the Romani elites and Romani mobilization. And this is the power of knowledge, which we didn't have until recently, as Jan said in his book and his presentation. So another layer of power we have started to achieve and learn is the power of knowledge and production of knowledge. So this power, we have to hold on to it. And your two works are very clear on this. And Desho's work of earlier as well is this power we got, and we learned how to produce this power and to hold on this power. Of course, they are complementary as well, because one is about collective memory, one is about using the collective memory about collective reparations. So similar but complementary in the same way, in the same time, and it helps us a little bit, not a little bit, I mean, for me, as I said in my preface, is kind of a not kind of is the proof that what I said in the last 5 years in the public meetings is true. The Romani, we have to be proud of our Romani movement, and we don't have to fight anymore, and to ask ourselves, we didn't do anything. We've done a lot, and your books are the proofs of that, with lack of power, lack of resources, only our power mobilization and our resources, our brains, our time, our energy, and never paid enough for what we have done. But these two books are the occasion of, for me, to have the knowledge and the proof, written proof, that I feel proud. That I feel proud that some colleagues of mine can produce this knowledge, and also this knowledge also help others to go on. Of course, there's also a question of positioning in these two books. And you have Roma and non-Roma together working. And this is, again, something which is new. And while we had the Gypsy Law Society again, positioning in a power position with us as subjects and questioning my identity, questioning my true Roma, questioning my true brain, if I have a brain or not, questioning if I will be able to produce knowledge because I'm a Roma and I can be subjective and everything. So that's also, again, a kind of and Dejo's also, the collection Dejo presented here is like a breakthrough. We prove to you that it's possible to do it differently. We prove to you that you are not right. We prove to you that knowledge can be produced in different ways than we did. Of course, there's a lot of work behind all these, and we all know how much struggle was and how much fights we had, all of us, in different spaces. So also, I think it's the next step is also it's material where it could be used to create spaces of debate. And someone said earlier it's about going to public. And what is missing in our contemporary societies in Europe, I don't know about the United States very much, are spaces where opposite parts are coming together in a sense of communication and debate. So, like, I would like to have a debate with an extreme right movement on a public debate where I can discuss and confront in a public, not on the ground, in social media, in virtual spaces and this kind of stuff. And I think these two books, it's giving us materials for that, to go further from knowledge production, to reinvent in the European society the public spaces of debates, the public spaces where we meet our opponents and debate in a respectful manner, of course. But nevertheless, for example, in Romania, about slavery, there's nothing like that. There's nothing about Holocaust in other countries. So for me, I think Roma, the way Roma question our societies, it's also it's a way of how to say, finding solutions for our societies. I think the problems Roma are posing to, or problems perceived as problems to our societies, in fact, are more general problems, and I think we are also the solution holders of the solutions, not only when it comes to Roma, but also when it comes to democracy, and also when it comes to transparency, and when it comes to these public spaces. So yeah, thank you very much for your work.
Yes, yes. Thank you both for writing these fantastic books. Thank you, Nicoletta, for your comments. In the interest of time, I'm not going to actually address the questions I prepared to the panelists. I want to make sure that if one thing kind of comes out of this panel, is something that both books, I think, do extremely well, and is kind of a point of intersection, which is this topic of historical justice. So Jan's book in chapter 2 really lays out this connection between historical justice, collective memory, and continuing anti-Gypsyism. And Magda also highlights this in the chapter that she writes too, where and I talked earlier about the wake, right? And both of these books do a really good job of connecting present kind of discrimination towards Roma to these historical traumas of the past. And I think this term, historical justice, is really key to kind of understanding that connection, and they both kind of argue for why that's important in their texts. Something that I also wanted to highlight that that struck me in Jan's book is he quotes from Ian Hancock, and then he quotes where Ian's talking about the sort of pain of trauma. And I know we've been talking a lot about Roma, you know, as kind of depicted in the state of victimhood, but at the same time, I think it's important, of course, to kind of bear witness to that trauma. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of art and a lot of music has been a way of working through that trauma. And Ian in that quote is talking about this need for kind of a recognition of trauma. And then Jan follows that up, and he brings in this quote from Adorno, which is confrontation of the past must be linked to societal change. And I found that so useful, because it really ties together, I think, a lot of what Nicoletta was also saying in terms of using you know, this research to enact actual social change. And so that was the question that I was going to ask the panelists, is how you see these things contributing. And I think Nicoletta and Magda both already answered that question, because Magda really lays this out in the chapter. And when you read it, you'll see she lays out, here are all the things that we can do. We can truth tell, we can have these conversations, we can have public apologies. But I think what's really important is that she lays these things out and says that it needs to be a kind of nexus of all of them at once, right? And that no single mechanism is going to really redress is not going to be a mode of actual reparation. And just to kind of end, I just wanted to highlight another thing that Nicoletta just said, which is about what these texts are offering to Romani communities. And I think Jan's text and Magda's texts both are about empowering Romani communities with knowledge about their own history, right? And I think if I share my experience often of not having known that Roma had been killed in the Holocaust until I was 24 years old. That is shocking, and it's appalling, and it's what Bell Hooks calls the institutionalization of ignorance. And both of these books are working to combat that institutionalization of ignorance by institutionalizing knowledge about Romani issues, which will have a trickle-down effect in Romani communities and Romani struggles. So I'm gonna let Martin decide if we have time for questions, because I know we have the bus to catch. I keep talking about the bus. Okay, so yeah, if we could maybe collect all of them and then have the panelists respond.
Hi, it's just a curiosity about the methods of reparation. Did you think these methods before doing the book, or they appeared after the book was done and you just systematized these 8 methods?
So some of the methods, as I said, were there in the Roma movement for a long time. So I think that having a background in activism back home in Romania, it kind of helped me, you know, make some things very clear. So we did wanted an apology from the Romanian state. We still want that apology. We still want an apology from the Orthodox Church. This has been not my work, and I can take that, you know, as my idea. This has been work that has been done in Romania for 30 years now. So it was there. We just needed to put it in a framework and to place it along other calls for reparations that have been made by other reparations movements in the world. We also wanted to connect our call for reparations with the global conversations. So from that perspective, I think that if you are to look at the theoretical background, there are several schools of thoughts. You know, if you are to look at Marta Mino, she has very, you know, 3 clear methods of reparations, and then Sandy Darity comes from an economic perspective, and he has another totally different 3 methods of reparation. So you just look at whatever is there, framing a theoretical, you know, concept, but I think that what I want, and perhaps this is something that it's important for the room as well, is also to come in this space of global conversations with our own experiences. So I'm not interested just to copy whatever Bell Hooks says, Patricia Hill Collins, and everyone else, people that I admire so much, but I'm interested to see what exactly would be feasible and important for Roma people themselves. And I think, for instance, for me, this idea of offender accountability is perhaps a very subjective thought, but I feel so strongly about it. So I don't know if I answered to your question, but I think that this is the methods that we proposed are the products of a lot of reading, a lot of community work, and also some personal choices that we made. But once again, I do believe that categories are important, but at the same time, sometimes they narrow the practices that you may encounter. And it's not for me to say, and in the book we made that clear, and in other lectures and op-eds I say that as well. So these are, let's say, the schematic tools, but it's not for me to say what the women in the Czech Republic need. I think it's for them to be at the table and tell the governments what they want to see in terms of reparations. So it's the community that should give that. We only provide some tools, but it's the community members, those affected by the harm, that have the power and should have the power to say what they want.
Okay, I don't see any other hands up. And maybe, oh, is there one?
I do a comment.
Oh, yes, please. Right.
Thank you very much. I learned something very important today by the exhibition outside. I think that is a tool that we never thought, I actually never thought in that way. And I really took it into me, and I will think and try to get that into my mindset more obvious and clearly. And I think you as writers, I am no writer, I'm a speaker, should think about it, how you write, it's simple, understandable, so we can gather the big mass, bigger mob, because this is what we need. I have been trying to speak about this so many years now, about the Truth Commission. I speak about reconciliation, about trust, mistrust, and some different ways also. But this was a new angle, and I think it is key in that one. Thank you. And thank you for all your work. And thank you for this day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Soraya. I think that your work in the European Parliament, but also here in Sweden and in Europe, I think it's been spectacular in so many ways, because, we write, but I think that you've been the one who pushed this in policy spaces, in political spaces. And I think there is a need for a partnership among us. So earlier we were talking about, some of us are writers, some of us are advocates, some of us are activists. But the fact is that I believe that I have a responsibility to work with you and others to actually push this as an agenda for our people. So it's not just writing from, this space of power.
Tools.
Exactly.
We need tools to raise them up.
Okay, I really hate to be the one who stops fantastic conversation, but I'm going to do it. It's very hot in here. It's been a long day. Thank you all so much for sticking through it with us. And I guess we should all go to the bus.